Hello, everyone. Good evening from Melbourne. I guess good afternoon for most of Asia. Good morning to our colleagues and friends in the United Kingdom. And weirdly, good night to the people who've joined us from Hawaii for this session. So the time zones are all getting a little bit complicated, but it's very exciting to be here with you all and to share with you the inaugural New Directions East Asia Best Student Research Idea Awards. My name is Dr. Joanna Mottram. No, my name is Joanna Mottram. The doctor thing doesn't really matter that much. I'm getting a bit tired, but this is a really good opportunity to share with you some information about the awards, and then for you to get to know the shortlisted participants a little. They're all here with me in the Zoom room. So I'm going to start this session a little with a bit of background into why we have decided to run these awards this year, and then some acknowledgements, because there's been some great contribution from our community and from the students. So we'd really like to acknowledge that during this session. So the reason why we decided in the organising committee to run these awards was, obviously we've been talking about this a lot. We've had an unprecedented past 2 years or so, and a lot of the opportunities that I had when I was a PhD student to go and talk to people about my research, build a name for myself, engage with other researchers have dried up a little bit. Obviously, there have been some really novel ways of people to engage through regional associations linked to language testing, but there are fewer opportunities. So we wanted to offer students an opportunity to share their research. And we also wanted to give our conference audience an opportunity to engage with that research a little, partly by attending this session and also by voting for a People's Choice Award. I need to acknowledge, before we get started on our question and answer session with our shortlisted student submitters, that there were more than 20 submissions for the award. So this was wonderful for us to see so many different research ideas. And if I'm completely honest with you, there were some really, really interesting ones which had absolutely no clear link to language testing, which suggests to me that there is definitely a need for this kind of opportunity beyond our language testing and assessment community. So this is something that we'll be talking about at the British Council, about an opportunity to expand into a more general English language teaching and learning space if we're to run this award in the future. And I think that that would be really well received. So we'll definitely consider that. I also need to acknowledge, and this comes both from myself and from the expert panel, who I'll introduce in a moment, that it was really difficult to judge the submissions because many of them were really, really interesting, but also because we had submissions which talked to us about research at different stages of the research. So most of the presentations we chose to shortlist are very mature in their research. But we'd also like to send encouragement to the submitters who are early on in their research process, because we think all of the studies we saw were really, really promising and engaging. Also, the quality of the submissions in general was high, which meant that the long listing, which was our first stage, was a bit of a challenge. And then the shortlisting was even more challenging. And so, just so that the people behind the Zoom room wall know this, the decisions have been made and they were made on the basis of the video. So the intention for this question and answer session, which is coming up in a moment, is to give you an opportunity to attend a conference with a different perspective and to see the back end of the conference that you might not get to see other times. So please don't be nervous, and please enjoy this opportunity to have a chat with our expert panel. So apart from getting to watch all of these very entertaining submissions, the highlight of this experience for me has been the collaboration with our expert panel judges. So we have Dr. Jason Fan of the University of Melbourne and Dr. John Pill of Lancaster University sitting on the expert panel with me. So Dr. Jason Fan is Deputy Director and Senior Research Fellow at the Language Testing Research Centre, LTRC, at the University of Melbourne. And he is a highly prolific researcher. So being a prolific researcher, he knows his research and he knows his methodology. So it's wonderful to have him with us. He's also co-editor of Papers in Language Testing and Assessment, which is the journal of the Association for Language Testing and Assessment of Australia and New Zealand. So he reviews submissions regularly. And I wonder, Jason, if PLTA might be a good future home for some of the papers we have shortlisted today. There's a slight plug there. We could talk about that later. And also with Jason and myself is Dr. John Pill, and he's a lecturer in language testing at Lancaster University. And as part of that role, he supervises MA students in their research projects. So he gets to see a great deal of language testing research, which makes him a very valuable part of this expert panel. He also does research on testing language for specific purposes, which is really important work. We also have an opportunity to watch John present straight after this session. So I'd encourage everyone to go to that session and listen to him talk about a test scale linking project that he's been involved in recently. So from me, a personal thank you to both of you for your generous engagement with the process, and thank you for your time today. And of course, on behalf of my colleagues in the organising committee for this conference and from our student submitters, I'd say thank you very, very much. I'm going to stop my sharing because we're going to move to the question and answer session, and I'm hoping that I'll be able to make everyone visible for this session. It looks good to me. I hope that looks good to everyone on the outside. I'm going to invite my... Oh, I forgot to mention something. I'll mention it later, it'll be fine. Let's do the question and answer. So I'm going to ask someone to help me with this right now. John, would you like to start the questions? And I'll be quiet. Yeah.
Thank you very much. And thanks for your introduction. It's been a real pleasure to be involved in this work, and I support all the things you've said about the submissions. So thanks to the guys who are in the room today. Congratulations on being on the shortlist. So I'd like to start perhaps with a question to Ji-eun, if that's okay. Sorry to, someone's got to start. Thank you very much for your presentation about the online TOEFL, the home edition, and test takers' views, their perspectives on this. It's very interesting. I wondered what you thought you would do with the findings. So you'll look at the online forums and discussion, and we can learn from that, but how do you see your findings affecting the world of testing, at least?
Yeah, thank you. Anyway, I would like to mention that it's such a big honor to be shortlisted, and I think that's a great question. That is the question that I have been holding on for a while, and I'm still working on. And I did the preliminary analysis. I didn't share the video though, but I have the slide. If I may, I can also share that. But just to answer that question, according to my preliminary analysis, there were some findings about. There were a lot of talks about settings, what materials they needed, allowed or not allowed during the test. And when they will get the test results, there were a lot of talking about scheduling as well. And the talks change over the time. So at the early stage of the implementation of the TOEFL Home Edition, it was people even didn't believe that this is possible, taking the test at home. They were asking each other about that. And they were worried if the test stakeholders would accept the score. And later on, the discussions were built into malpractices because students, their scores, their tests were stopped. Because mostly because of the break time, there were some noises and they had longer breaks. So I saw that the perceptions and people's words are very interesting. And like I mentioned, at the significance of the study, so now we started to take a test at home. So I think that's a change of the language testing landscape. I think it won't go even after the pandemic. Since we have it already, we will have it for some while. That's why I'm still working on the study, and I have other related studies that I'm working with Dr. Isabel too. So to specifically answer to your question, I would say to looking at the students, test takers' perceptions, that would allow us to bring to the future of the language testing that what we should fix on the language testing and how we can make the online test more fair, secure, justice. We can think about the validity issue, security issue, a fairness issue, and the justice issue out of this, I guess. Yeah, that is my answer.
Thank you. Thanks for your answer. And thank you also for introducing me to the term netography, which I was very pleased to learn about. So thanks for that.
Yes, netography is growing research methodology in our field, right? Yeah, it's really useful, I guess.
Thanks. Thank you, Joanna.
Thank you, John. So Jason, if I hand to you for your question, your first question.
Thanks, Joanna. Yeah, I have a question for Sarah. Yeah, Sarah, congratulations again on being shortlisted. Your study looks very interesting. I'm wondering whether you can explain a bit about the notion of group dynamic assessment in the context of L2 writing. And a related question is, what do the 4 groups in your study do, and how mediation is provided in the group dynamic assessment context? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much for the question. Well, I'm in the pilot stage of actually implementing the study, and I did a preliminary analysis of the pilot findings. So I guess writing is a process where learners could actually benefit from working as a group and also working within the context of a group where they can actually see one another's papers and develop from that. So I think individual schema can be affected by group schema. And this was done through a conference. We called it conference, but it was actually a mediation. And the mediation was done by based on the scale that I created. And this scale was actually based on Eldrefray and Lentoff 1994 study. And the scale ranged from implicit to explicit prompt levels. So the most implicit level was level 1, where I pointed out where the area of error was for coherence and cohesion. And then it extended to the most explicit level of prompt, where I pointed out what the error was. But within that process of implementing the prompts and giving prompt feedbacks to the learners, I could elicit some responses from the learners that helped them understand their own learning process, and also for me to diagnose where their understanding of coherence and cohesion was. And also, because my study was in a group setting, there were primary interactants that I focused on with the mediation, but there were secondary interactants, which are the group members in the study. And those students also benefited from looking at the mediation in a secondary interactants perspective. And so basically the mediation that happened within the different group conferences that I conducted helped students in developing their coherence and cohesion based on engaging in the process of mediation with myself as a mediator. And I think it allowed a chance for students to actually have agency and involvement in the assessment process, as well as the learning process. So I think what dynamic assessment has strengths in is that it can actually integrate assessment and instruction together and have a formative effect on students' learning process. And the writing is usually a process-based procedure that can benefit learners. And so dynamic assessment and series of cycles of dynamic assessment with the group actually helped students develop that process-based learning writing skills in terms of coherence and cohesion. So I hope this kind of answers your question. If not, I can explain more.
Thanks, Sarah. Yeah, that does answer my question. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jason. I'm going to grab the floor again. And I have a question for Nick. I don't know, Nick, if you managed to see Jay Banerjee's presentation that would have been at silly o'clock for you. So I'm going to assume not. But in the presentation, she talked about some research that's been done recently on a Trinity assessment where they were comparing candidate performance online and offline. And one of the results, or the findings that she discussed, was that students in the online environment tended to speak more fluently, but also paused for longer. And what they were suggesting was that the pausing for longer was linked to the online environment, where you don't need to hold the floor quite so aggressively as you do in an offline environment where someone else might interrupt you. So this is a very long way of me getting to the differences between online speaking and offline speaking and what you're finding in your study. Do you want to talk about that a little? Because I think it's really, really interesting and incredibly timely.
Yeah. I think the thing I want to just say at the beginning is this started before COVID, so it's been very fortuitous for me what's happened to the world. That sounds very selfish, but you know, yes, differences between online interaction and face-to-face interaction. This is something which has been done in language testing. As you're probably aware, there have been certain comparability studies, as you were saying, with TOEFL IBT, but also with IELTS as well. There were studies done to see what differences there were. Broadly speaking, I think those studies have more or less found that there's very little difference in terms of scores. But my study is using conversation analysis, and that presents a very interesting and entirely different window on this, in that where CA has been used in looking at online interaction, there are all kinds of things that are slightly different. So to pick some obvious ones, obviously you don't have such a recourse to embodied conduct. You know, you can probably see my hands moving right now, but you can't see where I'm looking. If I say, "And how are you?" we don't know who the recipient of that question is. And that this is all stuff that's kind of fundamental to how we interact face to face, which certainly in the IELTS study, I think they had to mark who the question was for, or at least kind of the interlocutor felt they had less ways of directing questions and getting the candidates to answer. So there are all kinds of things like that. In terms of the pausing, that is an interesting feature, but it may also be because it's a test. And there's inherently often a bit of an asymmetry in the power relationship that exists within a test. I think there was a study that was done in China a few years back, which showed that there were sort of more pausing between candidates talking to each other. And that was partly because they couldn't project when the transition was going to occur. In CA terms, it would be the transition relevance place. Ordinarily, we're quite good at picking those up and projecting it because we can see as well where this is coming. But particularly in that Chinese study, they didn't have access to the visual channel. So it was even harder to sort of project where the turn closure was going to come because you couldn't even see the person. It's, you know, it's a bit like if you're on the telephone, sometimes you kind of pause for a moment because you can't tell when that's coming. If the intonation doesn't signal it, then, you know, you're a little bit stuffed. So that's something that's interesting. The thing I will say about my study, where I'm at the moment is I did a pilot study a long time ago, which was comparing face-to-face with online. This is pre-COVID. Obviously, since then, it's just moved purely online focused, partly because that's where the gist of this study is. But it was interesting in that when the candidates took the face-to-face one, it was the B2 first part 3 speaking test. It was all very measured, very controlled, and highly choreographed. When they took the online task, it was very much more competitive talk, I think is how Anthony Liddicoat describes it. There was a lot of no gap, no overlap turn taking. There was even some instances of competitive overlap where they have to kind of resolve who's going to carry on speaking and that kind of thing. So even though there might be differences, this is part of the reason I want to study this, is because in the samples I've looked at already, there's what's called absolute adjacency. I think it was Gail Jefferson who came up with this term in CA, where there isn't this pausing. Actually, when you're in the throes of a conversation online, you tend to, there is quite rapid speaker change. And that's true not just of higher levels. Actually, we've seen it recently in a Cambridge thing that I'm doing, which is looking at A2 learners taking Key for Schools. And even there's not at the higher end of A2, they're not pausing for very long between turns, because they can pick up when the closure is coming of the current speaker's turn. So yeah, it's a really interesting area to study. And yeah, there are lots of things. There's also latency online, where you've got technical time lags and things like that, which can throw you off. But there was an interesting study on that last year by some researchers in CA, which showed that even where there is latency, you either might not be aware of it from your perspective online, or even if you are aware of it, the turn-taking systems that we use when we converse actually kind of can build that in and manage it to some extent. So it might occur as an overlap. Well, then we deal with it like we deal with overlaps generally. And I'll stop waffling there. Sorry, it's just quite interesting.
I'm going to be competitive with you on that. Try and take over the control of the talk for a moment. But thank you very much, Nick. Really interesting. I'm going to pass back to Jason. Do you have another question for one of our Ken?
Yeah, I have a question for Zhang Yu. Your study also looks very interesting. I'm just interested in the data you're going to collect. You mentioned teacher journal, test paper, test report, and it's a longitudinal study. So I'm just wondering, so can you probably just elaborate a little bit on, on this data, and how are you going to use them to address your questions? Thank you.
Thank you, Jason. That's a very good question, because that is, I think, the most here the question I truly want to explain. In fact, there's like a teacher journal, testing paper, test report, and in-depth interview. So this study but undertook for one has been done just 1 or 1.5 years last year. I cannot remember. So for those data resources, I think because this is participatory action research, I did teach those students. Those students are college kids, like 19 years old. I was doing teaching and collecting data. So we have a teaching journal, and I was going to observe their performances and interaction and between me and those students, and testing paper. So this testing paper is quite like a semi-formal. It's not that formal, but it's every take like 3 weeks or 4 weeks, and there's a test. It's not a quiz, it's a test. It's a formal, but not that formal, because the test result, and would not be sent to the final score, the official final score. system. So those testing paper can really collecting the authentic and real here performances and from those students. And while I'm taking a more and so I can collect the here the how to say. So I was observing their performance and in classroom while I am doing dynamic assessment, and then I record them, and also need to record the results and from testing paper, because using testing paper is one of the method in interventionist approach. We do not collecting like data, and we do not do a more interactionist analysis, non-analysis, interactionist approach, and in this way. But that's why I truly wanted them to combine the two approaches, like one an interventionist and it resort and very much on like a stage test, and also I was doing more interaction and in the classroom. So asking questions and collecting their feedback and responses, and then combining the two the results from the two approaches, and see if those two approaches can be combined and to a real class. Because you know that here the interactionist approach is almost impossible using in the bigger size classroom. When you have 30 or 40 students in a classroom, the individual interaction cannot be, or it's not possible to conduct. So you have to find a way and to find the balance and between the interventionist approach and the interactionist approach, and make the dynamic assessment is more practical and in real and authentic classroom content. I hope that can answer your question. So this is also my research question.
Yeah, thanks you. I understand that collecting data for longitudinal study could be challenging, but I wish you the best of luck. It's a very interesting study. Thank you, Zhang Yu.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jason. And I think it's pretty obvious that we need to move quickly to Hardy. And my question for you is your decision to use the test, the language assessment literacy test. We all, John, Jason, and I all wondered about that. Where did that decision come from? Because it's very novel and interesting.
Yes, thank you. It's 3 a.m. in the morning in Ames, but it's very interesting and exciting. This is something that I'm looking forward, because yeah, I'm sure I will have a lot of comments and feedback, so I feel really honored for this. All right, so the decision why I designed language assessment literacy is first because some of the review based on the reviews that I have on the language assessment literacy studies, most of the studies use the self-rating questionnaire to determine the assessment literacy needs or assessment literacy profiles of the teacher educators, especially in the context of Indonesian. And we all know that the weaknesses and the strengths of the self-rating questionnaire, sometimes people just overestimate or underestimate perhaps their perceptions or things like that. So I try to be more, in this case, objectives. And the way I designed my test is based on this evidence-centered design. So it's based on well, in assessment, sometimes we try to make some claims about our students or our test takers' knowledge, skills, and abilities. So evidence-centered design is developed based on that. So we try to find some evidence. We try to what do you call it? To build or to create a very consistent process from finding evidence from their like for example, for their knowledge, for their skills and ability. And I hope that my test will be able to be used in, like for example, in my pre-service teachers teaching education, because based on my interview, there is a clear need of this kind of test. So we have a very important assessment reform program. So Indonesian government, in order to improve the teachers' quality, they started to have like teacher certification program after the what do you call it? So the effect of mourning. So pre-service teachers in Indonesia is a 4-year program, but government that decided to have like 1-year program after the undergraduate program to improve the quality. And based on my interview, there is a test, like an entrance test, like an admission test for that program. But my study program, my English department back in Indonesia, they don't have access to that information. They don't have access to the result of that entrance test. So we have no clue whatsoever on the participants' performance. So we receive participants from various with various English background, coming from various places in Indonesia, and so sometimes we have no clue where to start, where to begin to help them. So with this test, I hope that we will be able to like, okay, so this is what you need most. And I designed it based on a scenario-based test design, which is like, for example, to provide them with a scenario, and the scenario is based on the real context. It's based on on what they need most. So I hope that answers the question.
It certainly does, Hadi. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you.
Now I'm going to do my very best, very quick finish to this session, because I know that Dr. Pill needs to go and present in another room in a matter of moments. So if I can just skip through this and tell you about the prizes that are coming from the assessment research group. So this is something that I would, as the self-acknowledged language testing geek, I'd be very pleased to receive this prize. It's a set of 4 modern monographs, the British Council monographs on modern language testing, which are a very valuable addition to any language assessment expert's home library. So both the People's Choice and the Expert's Choice Award winners will receive greener copies of these, because they are digital copies. So that's very exciting, I think. So all I have to do now is announce the 2 award winners, and then John can duck off. So the first one I'll announce is the People's Choice Award, and this is what our conference attendees have voted for. They've watched your videos and then they've voted, and the people have spoken, and they have spoken and said thank you very much to Nick Glasson for your very entertaining and interesting video on Left to Their Own Devices, exploring interactional features in an online group of 3 speaking tasks. So big congratulations, and I can see my co-panelists clapping away. It's very good and great for the people to quite decisively choose that one, so yay. And for the Expert's Choice Award, I should have a very long citation written, but I don't. Suffice to say that Jason, John and I agreed that the winner of the Expert's Choice Award presented a very mature and well thought through study, clearly presented, and we wish we wish Hardy all the best with his future research, and congratulations again to all shortlisted submitters, and we will be in contact very soon. Now, John, you're going to have to jump. Thank you very much. Thank you very much to John. Thank you very much to all of our students. And thank you very much to our conference organisers. There we go.
Thank you very much.
Congratulations, everyone.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye.
Sorry for the very quick ending there. Congratulations,
fine.
Nick.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Congratulations, Hardy.
Congratulations.
Congratulations.
Thank you so
Thank
much.
you.
Thank you.
And well done for getting out of bed at 3 a.m. for this.
There should be a prize for that as well, really.
Yeah.
But it's beautiful outside. It's snowing.
Oh.
Yeah, so I'm not even sure if I've got a good question. So ends now, and I'll let him know that we are done. I don't know if we're still live streaming. So
Yeah.
so
I'm
yeah,
going to go to John's session. Yeah, congratulations.
Okay.
Again.
Thank you.
Yeah, we'll speak soon.